Faith in politics, with tensions between Catholic leaders and SNP ministers deepening over plans to allow same-sex marriage. We look at the Church's place in political debate. And behind the veil, Scottish Muslim women launch a campaign to challenge people's perceptions. Relations between the Catholic Church and the Scottish Government have become increasingly strained, with Cardinal O'Brien declining face-to-face talks on plans to legalise same-sex marriage. Ministers stand accused of constantly ignoring the Church's views. David Marsland examines the disconnect between the Church and our political leaders.
Scotland is a religious country. More people go to church at the weekend than football. Yet, on those occasions when politics and religion collide, churches have found their views don't count for much. In particular, the Catholic Church.
We didn't vote for it, and we're no having it.
Doctrinally, it's quite a solid position that marriage is a sacrament between a man and a woman.
The war hasn't started yet because that church believes in what it considers to be eternal values. You know, it's not for me, it's not into flexibility. That's for politicians to be.
But even at its height in modern times, the Church has never claimed more than 18% of Scotland's population. These days, it's around 15%. The Catholic Church has always been good at making an impact. This is St Andrew's Cathedral right in the heart of Glasgow. When this building was finished in 1816, it came following a period of more than 200 years after the Reformation, when there'd scarcely been any Catholic presence in Glasgow at all. So you can imagine a building of this size appearing right on the banks of the Clyde, what sort of impact that would have had on the city, and also those who came to worship here. With impact comes influence.
The assumption behind many political parties is that the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church can influence their people, can influence the vote one way or another. And it's certainly the case that the SNP in particular have been indulging in a process of seduction of the Roman Catholic hierarchy and, of course, Catholic people as a whole.
That relationship's in danger of breaking down. Cardinal Keith O'Brien's refusing to speak face-to-face to Alex Salmond in a row over the legalisation of same-sex marriage. Alex Salmond's not the only politician in Parliament.
There will be a very interesting period now between the campaign beginning and the final vote in the Scottish Parliament, because this is still something which is an aspiration of the Cabinet. It is still to go through the Scottish Parliament.
MSPs need only look at the Pope's last visit to Scotland to see the support the Catholic Church still has. But gay marriage has cross-party backing and does look destined to come into law. The Catholic voice on this issue, at least, does not appear to be loud enough to make an impact.
We're now joined by the Scotsman journalist and biographer of the late Cardinal Winning, Stephen McGinty, the editor of the Scottish Catholic Observer, Liz Leyden, and the co-leader of the Scottish Green Party, Patrick Harvey. Welcome all to Scotland tonight. Liz, we heard there that more people go to church than go to football at the weekend. But by the same token, a lot more people go to shopping at supermarkets. This is a point that's made by one of our tweeters, Paul Tyler. We don't canvass the opinions of the supermarkets, so why do we with the churches?
I think the churches are the soul of our society, and as your package said, as your news broadcast there said, basically the church is not fickle to fashion. The church has a continuity, it knows what it stands for, and the Catholic hierarchy have been speaking out for people of many faiths and people of none on some of these issues. It's just something that needs to be done.
Patrick Harvey, another tweeter, Stuart Wilson, makes the point that, OK, church membership is falling, but it's still sizable. They are entitled to be listened to.
Everyone in a free society, in a democracy, is entitled to be listened to. I think my concern is the disproportionate focus that's given to religious viewpoints and to figures in a religious hierarchy who don't necessarily represent the views of the people they claim to. You know, the Cardinal doesn't conduct a consultation exercise with Catholics in Scotland before he decides what his priorities are going to be or what his position on an issue like marriage is going to be. It's the view of the hierarchy only. I've had people, even this evening, speaking to me online saying, I'm a Catholic, I don't feel represented by this, these aren't my values. So it's important to remember that yes, the church as an organisation, religious people as individuals and collectively have a voice, but let's not give it disproportionate voice. Most marriages in Scotland, for example, are fully secular. They're either civil marriages in a registry office or they're conducted by the Humanist Society, which conducts more marriages in Scotland than the Catholic Church.
Stephen, another point that's been made, A. MacDonald makes the point, you know, the Catholic Church seems to have a view on an awful lot of things and expresses them very strongly. What about the other churches? Why does it do so more so than, say, you know, the Church of Scotland, which is by far a greater congregation?
Well, the interesting point is that what we're seeing here is the passing of a high watermark in terms of the Church's influence in Scottish society. When Archbishop Winning was invited to attend the General Assembly in 1974, he saw what the Church of Scotland had at the time, which is what he perceived as power and influence and a free communication with politicians. He said that his goal was to achieve that, and by the time of his death, he was by far the leading churchman in Scotland. Politicians listened to him. In fact, when I was interviewing him, he said sometimes you just have to bang the table and say, "Shut up and listen to me," which is not what you would imagine a churchman to say. But he believed that, you know, that the church had influence and that sometimes that's what you had to say. What we are seeing here is Cardinal O'Brien effectively trying to do the same thing. Now, there's a difference between people listening to you and people not agreeing with you and not doing as you tell them to do. And that is effectively why the church is so annoyed at the moment, because you know, the politicians are not listening to them and following their rules. But then again, many people didn't expect this to be the case, and they will know that themselves. You know, at their heart, they knew this is not a war they were going to win or a battle. You know, effectively, they are doing the best they can to argue their case, to make their case to as many people as possible. But they know that they will not win this. That this is one, and what we will see over the next few decades is a growing kind of culture war, so to speak.
Let's what about that point Patrick makes, and Jamie Brown makes the point as well. Religious groups are not representative of their members, and for example, contraception is a classic one with the Catholic Church, which is against everything the Cardinal would preach. So he's not necessarily representing his own congregation, is he?
I think he's not only representing his own congregation, he's representing other congregations, as have other members of the hierarchy. For example, Bishop Devine of Motherwell, who's just recently handed in his resignation, has often been held up as a spokesman for people within the Catholic Church and people of other denominations. I think basically the Church is holding up ideals. Now, these might not be ideals that we all can achieve on an hourly or daily basis, but that doesn't devalue them as ideals. I think basically if the Church is the soul of our society, it reflects our Christian roots. And these are things that would need protection. They shouldn't be marginalised.
And Patrick, a lot of people have made the point that you know, a lot of our society's laws, morals, are based on Scripture and church teaching, and we do ill to ignore that.
Well, historically that may be the case, but now we make laws in the only way that's democratically legitimate, through a parliament, through a parliamentary process with politicians who are elected. And so if we're debating what happens to family law or any other source of part of the law in Scotland, we should be reflecting everybody's views, not just those who are religious. Let's remember as well that religious freedom, which we don't actually have at the moment in terms of same-sex marriage, the religions are forbidden. They're not permitted, they're forbidden to welcome same-sex couples on equal terms. Religious freedom cuts both ways. It doesn't just mean freedom of religion, it can mean freedom from religion for the very many people who don't want to have a religious viewpoint imposed on them. And so, you know, the people who take an argument from religious freedom need to recognise that it cuts both ways. It doesn't only mean their specific religious freedom.
And Stephen, what power does the Church, the Catholic Church, any church now, what political power can it expect to wield?
It's a difficult. It's a good question. It's a difficult point for them because you know, they can embarrass leaders, as we see Cardinal O'Brien attempting to do at the moment by saying, well, you know, I'll not speak publicly to Alex Salmond. So there's the feeling that we know, and as the spokesman said before, they'll have casual conversations on the phone using first name terms to each other, but to the public, effectively, they won't be speaking, they won't be meeting with us. So there's that point. I mean, they can try and effectively politically trip them up. But in terms of the idea that the church can, as Tom Devine said in the package there, direct the church's followers to vote in a specific way at the ballot box, I mean, that's just false.
Patrick, Ruth MacLeod makes the point. It's not the church's roles to say necessarily what society wants to hear, but that shouldn't stop them from saying it nonetheless.
No, absolutely. And society, including politicians like myself who disagree with the church, have got a responsibility to listen and to take on those arguments and to scrutinise them as well. And I've tried to do that. I've tried to listen to the arguments from those that I disagree with, and where they have a serious argument, such as they don't want ministers or priests to be compelled, I've accepted that, and I'm willing to make compromise. But where they put forward, I mean, for example, as we've seen in recent weeks, spurious and ignorant and offensive nonsense, for example, about the death of Mr. Cairns, that needs to be challenged. That kind of nonsense and the sort of repetition of junk science that we've seen from the US into a debate in Scotland, that can't go unchallenged. It's the same kind of language that we've had on so many other issues, and it really does need to be held to scrutiny.
Liz, the church has come in, the Catholic Church particularly, has come in for a lot of criticism, as we've heard, over the death of the former MP David Cairns. Will the church keep on speaking, or do you think it might change its approach in any way, briefly?
I think the accusation of junk science cuts both ways. I think when people start talking in terms of a war and propaganda, I think that's a road to nowhere. I think it's a perilous road. I think basically when we're talking about democracy, as Patrick is championing, well, where is the democracy? Where's the democratic process in having a consultation and not listening to what that consultation shows?
OK. On that point, we'll need to leave it. Patrick, Liz, Steve, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, John.